We all know scientific progress has given us so much: longer lives, better health. It's amazing. But what if that progress has a really dark, hidden history? Today, we're going to dig into a tough topic, a really important one: the human sacrifice that has, at times, paved the way for some of our biggest scientific breakthroughs.
Yeah, this quote from our source, it just hits you, doesn't it? It really sets the stage for everything we're about to cover. It's a sobering thought that kind of shatters that clean, sterile image we all have of science and medicine.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to look at this core idea, the price of progress. Then we'll dive into three major historical case studies: Japan's Unit 731, the horrors of Nazi medical experiments, and some shocking experiments right here in the United States. And finally, we'll touch on some modern allegations that are raised in the source material.
All right, let's dive right in. The fundamental idea here, the argument from our source, is that scientific advancement hasn't always been this clean, noble process. You know, if you look back through history, there have been times when human beings were treated as little more than lab rats, all in this relentless pursuit of knowledge.
And this right here is a really stark, brutal example of what that means. The source makes this point that even our most basic knowledge, like, hey, don't eat that, it's poison, well, how did we learn that? Sometimes it's because someone was literally forced to ingest it, and their death, that became the data point. It's a chilling way to illustrate this central theme.
But this concept was taken to a whole other level, a truly unimaginable one, in our first case study. During the Second Sino-Japanese War, a secret unit of the Imperial Japanese Army, which we now know as Unit 731, began its absolutely horrific work.
So let's be super clear about what this was. Unit 731 wasn't just a research facility. No, its main purpose was to develop biological and chemical weapons. And to test these weapons, they used living, breathing human beings, mostly Chinese prisoners of war and civilians.
And the things they did, honestly, it's like something out of a horror movie. Just look at this list. They performed vivisections. That's dissecting people while they were still alive and conscious, with no anesthesia, all to study their organs. They would amputate limbs just to watch and study blood loss. They tie people to stakes to test how effective grenades and flamethrowers were at different distances. It's beyond comprehension.
So what was the human cost of all this? It's just staggering. The source estimates that 250,000 people, men, women, and children, died because of these experiments and the biological weapons they unleashed. It's a number so huge, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
And you might think, okay, that was a one-off horror. But it wasn't. At the very same time, halfway across the world, Nazi doctors in concentration camps were running their own campaign of brutal experiments on prisoners, twisting medicine into an instrument of pure torture.
And this slide really shows you just how twisted their science was. Take the hypothermia experiments. The so-called goal was to find a cure for German soldiers freezing on the Eastern Front. A noble goal, right? Well, the method was to force prisoners into tanks of ice water for hours, or just leave them naked outside in the freezing cold until they died, while doctors just monitored them.
And then you have maybe the most infamous of them all, Josef Mengele, known as the Angel of Death at Auschwitz. The source talks about his obsession with twins. He would inject one twin with a deadly disease and just keep the other as a control. Then, when the sick twin died, he'd kill the healthy one just so he could do a comparative autopsy. He even injected chemicals directly into children's eyes to try and change their color.
Okay, so it's really easy to hear all this and think, well, that was them. That was the enemy in a world war. But our source argues that, the story doesn't stop there. And it points to some really shocking examples of unethical human experimentation that happened right here in the United States.
And probably the most notorious example is the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. For 40 years, think about that, 4 decades, from 1932 to 1972, the US government studied the effects of untreated syphilis in poor African-American men. And here's the most unforgivable part. Even after penicillin became the standard effective cure in 1947, the doctors deliberately withheld it from these men, just to see what would happen to their bodies.
And believe it or not, this wasn't an isolated incident. Around the same time, from 1946 to 1948, US researchers actually went to Guatemala and intentionally infected hundreds of prisoners, soldiers, and mental patients with syphilis and other diseases, all without their knowledge or consent. This time, the goal was to test if penicillin worked. It took until 2010 for President Obama to issue a formal apology.
And this pattern, this exploitation of the most vulnerable people, it just kept going. At the Willowbrook State School, children with intellectual disabilities were deliberately infected with hepatitis. The researchers actually justified it by saying, oh, well, the conditions are so bad here, they'd probably get it anyway. It was a flimsy excuse for a massive ethical violation.
Wow. I mean, all of this history is it's appalling. And it forces you to ask a really uncomfortable question. A question the source brings up directly. Have we really moved past this? Have these kinds of experiments on people actually ended?
So for this last part, we're going to look at some modern-day allegations that are brought up in our source material. And it's really important to say this up front. These are controversial claims made by specific people that the source cites. We're presenting them here simply to explain the full scope of what the article covers.
Specifically, the source points to claims from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has been a really vocal critic of certain global health initiatives, especially vaccination programs that are funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
So according to the source, here are a couple of the key allegations from these critics. One is that a polio vaccine campaign in India actually ended up causing a new strain of polio that allegedly paralyzed almost 500,000 children over a 17-year period. The other claim is about a malaria vaccine trial in Africa, which critics allege led to 150 deaths and caused serious side effects, like paralysis, in more than 1,000 other kids. Again, these are highly contested allegations, but they're central to the source's modern-day argument.
So after laying out all of this history, and then these modern claims, the source kind of ties it all together with a bigger point about hypocrisy. The author basically says every country has skeletons in its closet, dark things it tries to hide. And in that light, they argue that portraying any one group, like Arabs and Muslims, as the sole villains is a deception, because it ignores the crimes that others have committed and hidden.
And that really leaves us all with a huge, challenging question to think about, right? The drive for progress, for finding cures, for gaining knowledge, that's a powerful force, and it's often a noble one. But as all this history shows, when that pursuit gets disconnected from basic ethics and respect for human life, the results can be absolutely catastrophic. So where do we draw that line? That's a question we have to keep asking ourselves always.